Hi, this is Jason from Effective Dashboards and welcome back to another video. In this video I'm going to focus on a visualization, and it's going to be the small multiples visualization. So I'm going to talk you through some of the setup options and also a couple of scenarios about how you might want to configure the small multiples with certain types of data for your organization. Okay, so let's get started. So I've got a line chart here, and the reason I've got a line chart is because I think a good example of how to use a small multiples visual is to replace a line chart that looks a bit cluttered and a bit busy, a bit like this one here. So in this one here we've got 6 different categories of work: breakdown, corrective, PM, etc. We're trending the number of man hours in the work that's in backlog. So how much overdue activity, how much work was overdue. And we want that to be trending down, and we can see here that there's various different trends for each of the different categories of work. So let's go and we'll create a small multiples, and we'll try and duplicate this and make it a bit clearer. So the first thing is you need to download the small multiples. It's in Get More Visuals, and you need to download that. It's not part of the normal. So if you're looking for it in here, you won't find it. It's not part of the normal sort of standard visualization suite, but it is approved by the Power BI team or by Microsoft. So I'm going to add that in, and I'm going to make it roughly the same size as this one. And the objective here is to make it clearer. Two things: a clearer trend without these overlapping bars, and make it clearer which of these colours belongs to which category. Okay, so you've got an example here where you've got quite a few different colours here, and you've got to kind of carry out the secondary look up here to say, well, there's a grey one here, what does that actually refer to up here? So let's start off with the field wells. So there's 4 different field wells. Start off with a small multiple, so that's a category that you want to create a mini chart for, a mini line graph for. So I'm going to call this one, I'm going to go for work type in this example here. So I'm just going to pull that out of my data model. The next is the axis, so that's going to be date. So this really should be a date or the date derived field, like quarter, year, something along that sort of length, month. So let's just choose date, and then for the values I'm going to use a measure here, and the measure is going to be our backlog, actual labour backlog. Okay, so I'm going to put that in. I don't want a tooltip at the moment, so I'm going to minimise that, and I'm going to minimise that to give us a bit of space. So we can see here, by default, what it's done is it's broken. So in essence, what it's done. Before I go any further, let's switch these tooltips off. So what it's done here is it's basically created a mini line graph for each of these different category values, or each of the different values within your category. So make sure you don't have hundreds of these. 6, 7, 8, 9 is fine. And for each one of those, it's got a standalone area where you can see the trend, rather than them being overlaid on top of each other here. So that in its own right makes it a little bit easier to see the trend, because you're not fighting with some of the other ones. However, out of the box and as standard, it's actually split this across a number of different rows. So if you want to be able to compare, for example, well that's you can compare these, but if you want to compare something in row 1 with something in row 2 underneath here, then it's a little bit difficult. Okay, so let's look at some of the configuration options here that help us sort this out. So the first thing is we're going to go into small multiples layout, and these options here dictate how the columns and rows, or how the graph, the line charts are separated across columns and rows within the visual. So as a standard, as a default, we've got a fixed width, and what we've done here is we define what the width of this is going to be. And this, in this occasion, it's 120, but 125. But if we change it to 100, and Power BI will then split this across multiple rows and columns, depending on the size that you dictate the visualization pane is going to be. Okay, so that's not what we want here. So what we want is a second option, which is fixed number of columns. So in this option here, you don't specify the width of each one of these, and it is automatically adjusted depending on the width of each line chart is automatically adjusted depending on the size of the visualization. Okay, and that's the one we want. And we want everything to be on one row here. And now we can see, we can easily draw a comparison between each one of these categories. Okay, so that's the option there that we're going to use. Now you can actually specify if you wanted it to split it across 3 columns. It will always be 3 columns, regardless of how big or small you make it. Then you can do that, but I'm going to leave it at all for just now. And the second reason I changed it is because I wanted to show you how you get it back to all. Because if you try typing all in, it doesn't accept it. So you need to press this button, this link at the bottom here, to revert to default. It'll revert this fixed width to default, but just change it. And you can see that all is grayed in here, and you get everything on one row basically. Okay, so next we've got the row sizing. So if I make this bigger or smaller, we can see this is a fixed height of 125. So again, if we change that to 100, it would change the height of that, and it doesn't really matter how you actually slice and move it about, it will always be 100 high. However, I wanted to divide evenly, because what it does is it gives you this blank space at the bottom here, and it means you've just got to make that a bit smaller. However, I like it to be divided evenly, and we can see that this will now extend to meet the size of visualization. So the rows and the columns will now basically extend to meet the size of the visualization, which I think is a better application, a better setup for this particular example here. Next, we want to sort this. Now, if there's no real sequence here, now by sequence I mean if we were looking at priority, for example, and it was obvious what is priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, and then priority 4, and then the values for each one of those, because that's makes more sense for the data, then fine, sort by the actual category value. However, sorting this alphabetically isn't really that useful. What we tend to do when we're looking at these graphs anyway is try to find the highest, the second, the third, the fourth, etc. So let's make it easy for people that are going to do that anyway, and we'll sort this by actual labour value, and we're going to sort this, rather than ascending, we're going to sort it descending. We're going to go from the largest to the smallest. Now, what this actually does, I've got an example here, is it takes the total value, not the last value. Okay. Now with the data I had, it was a little bit, I wasn't too sure if it was taking the last value in the set or if it was taking the total value, because actually the last value tends to be quite big. But what it actually has done here is it takes the total value, and I set up some data here where we had this CM was just 2 for all the data, and this one here was 1, and then it was a higher value of 10 for the final one, but the total was 40. You can see here, and I've sorted this excuse me, by value, and I've sorted this descending. We can see here that it's, because this is a bigger total value here of 62, it's sorted it by CM and then PM. So that just clarified that. So now we can see it's a lot easier to compare them. That's the largest one, and it moves down to the smallest. So let's look at another few configuration options that might be useful. And we'll go in here, and I'm going to select this. Okay, so styling. Now one of the things I really like to use here is a background colour. Now there's options here to put a border on, or you can use alternative colour if you want to, but I think the background colour is the best option for framing up each of the mini charts and making it easy for the eye to be able to just differentiate between each one of them. And you can make that maybe 65, just a little bit subtler, and that just helps to subtly create a border and a bit of a frame around each one of these. So that's a good option that I would recommend. Line styling, we'll come back to that. Oh, actually no, with line styling you can show the area underneath. Now that can be quite useful, and it actually starts to make it look a little bit like a bar graph, a bar chart. Now for that reason, what I would recommend is that you adjust the y-axis to make sure it starts at 0. Okay, because with a bar chart, the height of the bar represents the size or the magnitude of the value that's been measured. So for that reason, I would, well, first of all, if it's a line, then you're more interested in the trend. Okay, that's the primary reason for putting a line in. You want to see, is it the trend, is it increasing, decreasing, is it stable? But as soon as you colour this area in underneath, your mind's automatically thinking it's a bar chart because you've got bars of colour next to each other, or mine does anyway. So to defend against that, make sure that this does actually represent the magnitude of the actual value. Then go down to the y-axis and then scroll to the very bottom here of the y-axis options. There's loads of options here, and then just put that as 0. And we can see that it's started at 0. And while we're in here, we're also going to go and just change some of these configuration options here. I want to change the units to be thousands, so it makes sense for my data to make them thousands. And I'm going to make this no decimal places, okay, because there was no decimals here. So just tidy up that a little bit. So let's go back in. So we've done the styling, line styling, the x-axis. It's off by default, which is good because if you switch it on, let's make this a little bit bigger. All it's going to show you is the start and end date of the range, and we've got that up here, and I'll show you where that is in a second, how you switch that on and off. So that's why it's switched off by default. If you go to the x-axis, you can, you're showing the labels. We've made a couple of changes here, but the one here that I might change here would be text, just to make it, it's quite long here, actual label hours backlog, so you could just put in actual hours, just to make it a bit simpler. So that is that axis there. And if we go to legend, okay, so we've got a legend at the top here, and we can see that says actual labour hours. In fact, what I'm going to do is line styling. I'm just going to switch off this area. For our example here, I'm more interested in seeing the trend, but I will leave that at 0, it's fine. Yeah, go back to the legend. So you can change it to be the top or the bottom or the side. You know, there's lots of different options here, but I actually quite like it at the top because it reads quite well. Actual labour backlog hours by work type and date. And then here's the date range, here's the actual definition of what the actual bar is. You can switch it off, but I think leaving it on is fine. The title, so this title here just gives us this, it basically gives us the title there is the actual trend. So if I put date of work, you can see it's changed that there, so I'll just leave it as date. It defaults in from whatever it is you've called this axis here. And the other one that I would leave in is this one here, which tells you the date range. So you don't need it across duplicated. You don't need a date range duplicated across each one of these charts here. You just need it once to know what the overall date range is. And in the legend, there's a option here to have this suffix on or off. So it's on as a default, and I think that's a great option to leave on. So I think that is pretty much it for the first example here. So we've just really replicated this. We don't have the issue where we've got different colours and we've got to go and figure out which colour represents which line. We just read off the top here, CM, projects, PSPM, so we've got the work types here. We don't need to use different colours, which can sometimes make the dashboard look a little bit cluttered, a little bit difficult, particularly if you're using conditional formatting on KPI values. You don't want to use too many colours, you want those values to stand out. So the less colour you can use in instances like this, the better, in my opinion. So yeah, that's a great example of how you could use the small multiples to replace a cluttered line chart. Okay, so the next example I've got is using multiple, well, this is just showing you actually, this tab here is just showing you the difference between the two layouts. So the next example here is if you've got multiple measures that you want to put into each of the small multiples. And I'm going to add in one of these. And this example here, we're going to use the backlog by department. So I'm going to go and just quickly add in a department here as a small multiple. We're going to use the date again, and in here we're going to use 3 values. I'm going to use the planned labour hours, I'm going to use the actual labour hours, and I'm going to use the labour in backlog hours. Okay, so now what we've got is 3 measures for each of the small multiples. Now there is a danger here that this could get really busy really quickly. So let's go and just do a little bit of configuration. So the first thing I'm going to do, as we did before, is go to the styling, and we're going to add in a background, and that's going to help us just to differentiate between each one of these. Now in this example here, I'm going to go back up to the layout, and I am going to actually use the same option here, which is fix the number of columns, but I'm going to fix this. Oh, we've got a blank here. Let's get rid of this blank. Department. I'll just quickly get rid of this blank here. Now in this example here, I'm more interested in, if I'm a reader of this dashboard, I'm going to be a manager of one of these departments, and I'm more interested in actually understanding what these 3 measures are in comparison to each other for my department. Okay, so the fact that they're all in the same row is less of a consideration. It might be quite useful to have that, but it's less of a consideration because you're carrying out, when you're reading this, you're the manager, you're looking for your department, and you want to compare the planned hours, the actual hours, and the backlog hours with each other. So let's minimize this. So for that example there, I'm going to split this across 3 columns, and I'm going to use the divide evenly again just to make it split, or just to fill the actual size of the visual. And now we can see if I am the integrity manager, I'm going to look for my integrity stuff, integrity small multiple, and then I'm going to actually start to compare those with each other. Let me just switch off the tooltip, just kind of gets in the way. Okay, so I think that is that's a lot easier for you just to go and look at your integrity stuff and just compare the multiple measures within the trends for the multiple measures within the one line graph. To make it even easier to identify what each one of these means, so we've got a legend up at the top here. Make this slightly bigger. I'm just going to put it over this text here a little bit. Over to the side. What I would also suggest in this example here, what I've done is change the line styling. So if we go to the line styling, now what we'll see is each one of the measures has got an option to add its own style. And this is where these solid dashed and dotted lines come in. So let's use the top one as solid, that's fine. And let's scroll down, and we'll use the second one as being dotted. Dashed. Use that one as being dotted. And then we'll go for the third one. Oh, there we go. It's been dotted. Okay, so yeah, as long as we can differentiate between them. Now what happens is it makes it a lot easier to be able to differentiate between the lines because they look physically different. And we could actually even go in and let's just try this, just to make it even less cluttered in terms of colours, and make each of the colours the same. And just use the style of the line to actually differentiate between them. Okay, and that just again cuts down in the amount of colour you need to use if you want to use conditional format, and then you want to keep the colours quite bland and use a limited palette, and then just have red or green or some sort of different colour to indicate where you are above or below a target. So yeah, that's a second of the example here. This is probably going to be more useful if you're actually in a situation where you can't actually physically interact with the dashboard. If you were the engineering manager, you would probably just create one of these and you wouldn't be too interested in the other ones. However, if you're the overall installation manager, you might well want to be able to look at each of the departments and just compare as a secondary application of the actual visualization. You might want to compare, for example, which one has got the biggest backlog hours. So you're going along here, we can see backlog hours here is the dashed line. And again, you can makes it a bit easier to compare them with one another. I think that's it for just now. One last one. If you do use the option to fix these, okay, so if I change these back to fixed height, and you've got a slicer or any other filter that might, any other interaction within the dashboard that might filter this visualization, then be aware that it's just going to basically, it's going to make it just that small square because you've fixed the size, the height and the width of these. Okay, so that's another consideration if you are going to use the back in here, if you are going to use this fixed layout. Okay, but we've gone for the layouts. Now if you use that other layout there, what will happen is if you do want to filter in on this, then you're going to be able to quickly see, and it's going to fill up the all of the real estate that's been allocated to this visualization. So that to me is a lot better. Okay, so hopefully you've got a good understanding of some of the kind of key options that you've got for configuring the small multiples visualization, and hopefully you can see some applications within your own data, either if you just want to compare one measure across multiple category values, or if you want to compare multiple measures across multiple category values, and how you can configure it to be able to meet those applications. So if you have got any comments below about how you've used it, then I'm always it's always useful and always interesting to hear how other people are using the data or using the visualizations. If you like this video, I'd be happy if you give us a thumbs up. And if you want to subscribe, then click the subscribe button and you'll be kept up to date with the latest videos. I'll release one around about every week. Thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you in the next video.